wanted to talk slightly, step back a bit, big picture, because I think the UK is, I genuinely think the UK is doing something massively important at the moment. I know there's a lot of cynicism about governments and leadership, but by any metrics, I think this government, and by that I don't just mean one or two departments, but really across the piece, doing something to provide meaningful leadership across the world at a time when we've never needed that more. And the backdrop of all this, as Natalie was saying, is pretty bleak. I mean, you will be familiar with all the figures, but it's pretty shocking that we were supposed to have ended deforestation by 2020 in the New York Declaration, but today still we're losing 30 football fields worth of forest every single minute. We all know about the story of trash in the world's ocean, the millions upon millions of tons of plastic collecting in various spots across the ocean, actually affecting every single area of ocean. But at the same time, we're depleting the ocean of life at an unprecedented pace. And we're told by the IPBES that around 1 million species face extinction. So it's hard to exaggerate how bad the situation is from the point of view of what we're doing to the natural world. I think the world is waking up to climate change. We see evidence of that all the time, that the UK is running the G7 this year. We had some very bullish commitments just a few days ago from all the members of the G7. All of them signed up to net zero by 2050. We had the Climate Ambition Summit just a few months before that, part of this build up to COP26. And there again, we had commitments from countries that people were not expecting. China, 60 net zero by 2060. We had Japan, we had various other countries as well stepping up. And then, of course, we have the Paris Agreement itself, which we're trying to make real, in our presidency of the COP, trying to give meaning to those commitments that were made at Paris. And I think the market also, in terms of the carbon bit, that the market is moving unexpectedly fast. I mean, solar power costs have come down 90% since the banking crisis. I always think it's amazing that coal use fell faster under President Trump than it did under President Obama, despite the fact that President Trump was spending a lot of public money trying to prop up the sector. So the market is moving almost irrespective of the politics, but we're not really getting that with nature. Nature's always been treated as a kind of separate thing, almost an indulgence. While we deal with the serious things like poverty and more recently climate change, nature is something that can come later. But the Dasgupta review, I think, shows why that makes so little sense. I mean, none of us can insulate ourselves, no matter how much we think we can, from the natural world, all the impacts that we're having on the natural world. We are all dependent fundamentally for everything we have on the natural world around us that we are destroying. But for poor people and vulnerable communities, that dependence is much more direct and immediate. There are about 1 billion people who depend on forests for their survival. As those forests are grubbed out, people's livelihoods are too. About 1 billion people depend on fish as their main source of protein as we deplete the world's oceans, and all of the world's fisheries now are, all of them are overfished, but the majority are overfished, and all of them have been hammered. And the numbers are going down pretty dramatically. And soils, we know that the soil land degradation has reached the extent now that around 500,000 small farms are affected, and yields are falling as a consequence of what we're doing to the fertility of the land. I mean, there are millions of examples, but fundamentally it's the poorest and most vulnerable communities that are hit hardest and first as we destroy the natural world. But in addition to all of that, there's no pathway to net zero, to tackling climate change without nature. Our working assumption is that nature-based solutions could provide about 1/3 of the solution to climate change. And yet, despite all of this, nature has really been taking some second place. It's one of those box-ticking things, but it's never really been at the forefront of any government's approach until recently. And that's why UK leadership, the decision to put nature at the heart of our approach to climate change, not just climate change, but poverty as well, is just so fundamentally important and is having a ripple effect across the world. And as I said at the beginning, that it's more than just words. If you look at what we're doing domestically with the first Environment Bill in 20 years, a 25-year environment plan to put nature on a path to recovery, our first country, serious country, I think, well, first country full stop to legislate for net zero. First developed country to commit to phasing out fossil fuel subsidies. We're switching our land use system away from subsidizing destructive land use towards making every penny conditional upon good environmental outcomes. We're legislating for net gain, biodiversity net gain in all new developments, which is self-explanatory. We're legislating for due diligence to clean up our supply chains, to break the link between deforestation and commodities and our own use of commodities. So all these things are world first. So domestically, and of course we've got a lot more to do, but we are without a doubt providing really serious leadership in terms of what we're doing here in the UK. Internationally, we've committed to doubling our international climate finance to 11.6 billion. We've committed to spending nearly a third of that on nature-based solutions, and on the back of that, you, in many respects, are building an extraordinary pipeline of projects which will change the world. We're about to launch the £500 million Blue Planet Fund. Will have a massive impact, helping communities protect and restore the marine environments on which so many people depend. The £100 million Landscapes Fund, linking up threatened landscapes on a massive scale and helping to create jobs for people living in and around the corridors that are linking these great ecological areas, extraordinary valuable ecosystems, and we're developing much more. I hope we'll be able to do more with indigenous people. It's absolutely not a coincidence that the areas of forest around the world that are in best condition are often areas that are lived in by and looked after by indigenous people, who are very much at the bottom of the economic and political ladder and have quite an abusive relationship with governments all around the world. So I hope we can step up and do something there. Big interventions in the Congo Basin and the Papua New Guinea, etc. Really extraordinarily important places where many livelihoods are hanging in the balance, but where ultimately all of us have a dependence. So we have a very exciting time ahead of us, putting that 3 billion commitment to use, developing an extraordinary pipeline. But over and above what we're doing domestically, what we're doing with our ODA, we're also providing leadership internationally. We are, as you know, we're presidents of the COP this year. We're mid-presidency of the G7. We are actively building coalitions of ambition. We're actively delivering momentum. We're building coalitions of countries committed to transforming and shifting land use subsidies. If you consider that the top, I'm sorry if you've heard this 100 times, but the top 50 food producing countries spend $700 billion a year subsidizing often destructive land use. If we can get a bunch of those countries to do what we're doing here and shift those subsidies to support renewal and sustainability rather than destruction, that alone has the capacity to flip the market globally in favor of sustainability. So we're pushing really hard on that. We're trying to get other countries to join us in breaking that link between commodities and deforestation through an unprecedented dialogue involving producer and consumer countries, including countries that are quite tricky on these issues, and countries that are less enthusiastic, let's say, than we are about sustainability. We're running the alliance of countries committed to 30 by 30, protecting 30% of the world's ocean and land by 2030. We're doing that with Costa Rica and some other countries. We are using our leverage as one of the biggest contributors to the multilateral system to try and persuade the big multilateral development banks to mainstream nature in their portfolios, not just to fund a little bit of nature here and a bit of climate there, but to fundamentally align what they do as a whole, not just with Paris, but with nature as well. So if we succeed with those campaigns, we will have done the impacts would be tectonic, the gigantic impacts in terms of shifting the incentives, shifting the dynamic, turning the market from an environmental foe, if we're honest about it, to an engine of renewal. So it's hard to exaggerate how important this work is, and so many people on this call are making that happen. It's sort of very easy for people in my position as minister, just thinking up and working with teams to identify the priorities, but nothing would happen without the brilliance we have in the machine of government. And we've got some real heroes, some real stars who are going way beyond the call of duty and are changing the world. So I'm very, very grateful to all of you for the work you're doing. And And I feel that we are almost at a point where this recognition of the inextricability of nature with our well-being, our economics, our future is accepted almost as a default. We're not there yet right across government, but we're nearly there. And that is an exciting thing. As I said at the beginning, no government's doing enough. The UK is not doing enough. We've got a giant gap between where we are and where we need to be. But there is no doubt that we're raising the bar, and that is largely down to your leadership. So I'm, again, very grateful to you. Your work is about as important as it gets. And this is the year where we have all the cards. We have an opportunity this year to do something profound, and we absolutely can't waste that opportunity.